Greetings everyone. Welcome to the lecture on Introducing Indian Art. Presently, we are discussing the different kind of art forms as they evolved in the historical period. So if we talk about the 6th century BCE onwards, which is also known as the period of second urbanization, some new artistic themes and forms developed. Conquests of Alexander in 320s BC had an important impact on Indian art. He left colonies of Greek veteran soldiers in Afghanistan and Pakistan, some of which were sculptors. Their Greek-style carvings attracted attention in India, and first life-size stone statues in India date to around 200 BC, just after Alexander. In addition to this, there was also an influence of Buddhism in Indian art, and what emerged as a very prominent phase was the phase of Greco-Roman art, as you can see in this image that is being displayed on the screen. This kind of image of Buddha came to imbibe several features of Greco-Roman art forms in the kind of drapery, in the kind of headgear, and the kind of expression that was shown. And in this context, one can talk about Gandhara art. The Greco-Buddhist art or Gandhara art of North Indian subcontinent was the artistic manifestation of Greco-Buddhism, a cultural syncretism between ancient Greek art and Buddhism. The series of interactions leading to Gandhara art, however, occurred over a period of time. It was not as if overnight this influence developed. Beginning with Alexander's brief incursion into the area, followed by the Mauryan ruler Ashoka's converting the region to Buddhism. So Buddhism became the prominent religion in Indo-Greek kingdoms, and this also was clearly visible in the kind of art that developed in this region. So Greco-Buddhist art developed and matured under the Kushan Empire, when the first surviving devotional images of Buddha were created during the 1st to 3rd centuries CE. Gandhara art reached its zenith from 3rd to 5th century CE, when most surviving motifs and artworks were produced. Gandhara art is characterized by Buddhist subject matter, sometimes adapting Greco-Roman elements, a strong idealistic realism, sensuous description of Hellenistic art, and it is also believed to have produced the first representations of Buddha in human form. A very important example of this kind of amalgamation is that of the Patliputra capital, dated 3rd century BCE. This is associated with the early Mauryan Empire period. This would correspond generally to the reign of Chandragupta, his son Bindusar, or his grandson Ashoka, who all are known to have welcomed Greek ambassadors at their court. For example, Megasthenes came during the time of Chandragupta, while Dimachus came during the time of Bindusara, and Dionysius came during the time of Ashoka. Probably they had also come to Patliputra along with craftsmen, as is also suggested by some of the contemporary sources. So as you can see, these are some of the images which kind of indicate the Hellenistic influence on Indian art. these are some of the visuals from the Patliputra capital, which clearly indicate the kind of influence which was not truly indigenous, but it was a rich blend of Hellenistic as well as indigenous. The classical designs on the Patliputra capital, as you can see in this image, they include different kinds of beads, rosettes, reels, waves, beaded moldings, and stylized flame, palmette, and all these were definitely not the elements that were Indian elements in true sense of the term. So they had been borrowed from Hellenistic art forms, and they had been incorporated in Patliputra capital. So therefore we see that when we are talking about Indian art, what emerges is the idea of fusion. Since India is a conglomeration of various cultures, we see this kind of representation also in its art forms. It is a fusion of old traditional values as well as modern ideas. And with a 5,000-year-old culture, which is very rich in its tapestry of ancient heritage, medieval times, Mughal rule, British rule, a progressive art movement, and all these kind of blended perfectly in the time in which they were being developed. Now, we also see that in history there were different kind of influences. For example, one can talk about influence of the Seleucid Empire on Indian art, and the Patliputra capital may reflect this kind of influence also, or the neighboring Greco-Bactrian kingdom on Indian sculptural art. So the city of Ai-Khanom, that was located at the doorstep of India, interacting with the Indian subcontinent and having a very rich Hellenistic culture, was in a unique position to influence Indian sculpture, architecture also. Al-Khanom may have been one of the primary actors in transmitting Western artistic influence to India. For example, in the creation of the manufacture of the Kasi iconic Patliputra capital, or the floral phrases of the pillars of Ashoka, all of which were posterior to the establishment of Al-Khanom. The designs that were used in the Patliputra capital are seen in other known examples of Mauryan architecture also. For example, the pillars of Ashoka. Many of these design elements can also be found in the decoration of the animal capitals of different Ashokan pillars. For example, the roseate designs as well as the palmettis that was just displayed on the screen. Various foreign influences have been described in the designs of these capitals. So we see that there was always an attempt that was being made to incorporate the new, to incorporate something which was different, something which was not maybe part of Indian culture or art forms, but it was existing in the nearby areas and it was worth emulating. The animal on top of a lotiform capital reminds of Achaemenid column shapes. The abacus also often seems to display a very strong Greek influence. Here one can give example of Rampurva bull or Sankassa elephant, which is composed of honeysuckles alternated with stylized palmettes and small rosettes, as well as rows of beads and reels, which were clearly Greek or an Achaemenid influence. And a similar kind of design can be seen in the lost capital of the Allahabad pillar, as well as the diamond throne that was built by Ashoka in Bodh Gaya. So therefore, what emerges is a very diverse kind of art form that developed as a result of influences that were also wide ranging. Now, I shall be briefly talking about different schools of sculptures as they evolved and developed. For example, Mathura School of Art, Gandhara School of Art, then Amravati School of Art, and how these different schools of art kind of, while they all were making images of Buddha, but then the focus on drapery or style or the kind of expression that was being developed was different. In the 1st century CE onwards, one can say Gandhara, Mathura and Andhra Pradesh, they emerged as important centers of art. Buddha in the symbolic form got a human form in Mathura and Gandhara. So the sculptural tradition in Gandhara had the influence of Bactria, Parthia. Both these were Indo-Greeks, as well as the local Gandhara tradition. The local sculptural tradition of Mathura spread to other parts of North India, and the best example was the stupa sculpture that kind of spread in other areas also as far as Punjab. The Buddha image at Mathura was modelled on the lines of earlier Yaksha images, while in Gandhara it had more of Hellenistic features. So, while Hellenistic art, which was the art of the classical period dating from the death of Alexander in 323 BCE to the emergence of ancient Rome, started having its influence in the art of this region. While the images of Vaishnav and Shaiva faiths were also found at Mathura, but it was Buddhist images that were found in large numbers, which is also indicative of the kind of multi-religious society that was existing. The images of Vishnu and Shiva were represented with their weapons, and the characteristics of the different architectural schools were have been explained with some examples also, so that you all can understand the complexities and the unique features that one can ascribe to each art form, that is Mathura art, Gandhara art and Amravati art. Let us first talk about Mathura art. A large number of images dating back to the Kushana period can be ascribed to Mathura art. The image of Buddha from Karta Mount belongs to the 2nd century CE, and it represents Buddha with 2 Bodhisattva attendants. The Buddha is shown as seated in Padmasana and the right hand is in Abhay Mudra. The face of Buddha which is depicted is round with fleshy cheeks, and Mathura sculptures from this period were made with light volume and a very muscular kind of a fleshy body, and the garment used to cover one shoulder. The attendant figures are identified as the images of Padmapani as well as Vajrapani Bodhisattvas, as one held lotus while the other held a Vajra or a thunderbolt, which again was a very important part of these sculptural traditions. The halo around the head of Buddha was depicted as very large and was decorated with several geometric motifs. As you can see in this image that is being shown to you, all the features that I have just narrated are clearly visible. This is the image of a seated Buddha, Katra Mount, Mathura. You can see that how there is a huge halo just behind the head. Then another example that can be given is that of a seated Buddha at Sarnath, UP, which is made of Chunar sandstone. This probably belongs to late 5th century CE, and in this image Buddha is shown seated on a throne in Padmasana, and it also represents Dham Chakra Parvartana, which is the first sermon that he delivered, as can be seen from the figures on the throne or the preaching of Dhamma. So Dhamma Chakra Parvartana, which is also known as the first preaching of Dhamma, is indicated through this sculpture. And the panel below the throne depicts a chakra or a wheel in the center and a deer on either side with his disciples. Again, in this sculpture, the face is round, the eyes are half closed in a meditative mode, and the hands are shown in Dhamma Chakra Parivartana Mudra. Now, the aim of the sculptures in early India had always been to represent the Buddha as a great human being who had attained nirvana, that is, victory over anger and hate. And the source of development of Buddha images as well had its genesis in specific geopolitical conditions. As you can see in this image, which I had just described, the image of seated Buddha at Sarnath, you can see that how this image indicates that there was some kind of change that had come about. The meditative mood is so strongly conveyed, and so is the process of Dhamma Chakra Parivartana. Then another example that one can give and which can be ascribed to Gandhara art is the sculpture of Buddha head found at Taxila, which is in the Gandhara region, now in Pakistan. Now this dates back to 2nd century CE and it belongs to Kushana period. This shows a hybrid kind of a pictorial convention that developed during the Gandhara period. It had clearly Greco-Roman elements because the head of Buddha had typical Hellenistic elements. The curly hair of Buddha, the thick curly hair and linear strokes over the head, eyes were half closed and the face and the cheeks were not round like they were in the images of Mathura art that we had just discussed. So here we see a different kind of a depiction in Gandhara images, where the ears were elongated, ear lobes were elongated, and the surface was smooth. The image was very calm, and there was also some kind of a three-dimensionality that was being developed that was being shown in these images, and different kind of traits were being displayed in these images, whether it was Achaemenian or Parthian or Bactrian tradition, and these three traditions were getting amalgamated with the local tradition, and this was the hallmark of Gandhara style. As you can see in this, the Buddha head from Takshila, hair are seen curly and the face has a different kind of a finish, and the roundness of face is slowly getting replaced with an oval kind of depiction. Now the next example that one can talk about is that of Amravati style, and for this one can talk about Amravati Stupa of Andhra Pradesh. Vengi in Andhra Pradesh has many stupas like Amravati, then Bahati Prolu, Nagarjun Konda, etc. And Amravati has a Mahachaitya and had many sculptures also. So like Sanchi Stupa, Amravati Stupa also has a Pradakshina Path enclosed within a Vedika on which many narrative sculptures are depicted. So what do you mean by narrative sculptures? It basically means that how a story is conveyed through these sculptures. The Domical Stupa structure is covered with the relief Stupa sculpture slab, which again was a unique feature of Amravati art. The Toran of the Amravati Stupa, however, has disappeared over a period of time, and the early phase of Amravati Stupa was devoid of Buddha images, but during the later phase, that is around 2nd to 3rd centuries CE, the Buddha images are carved on the drum slabs and at many other places. Again, the sculptural forms indicate very intense emotions, and bodies are shown with Tribhanga pose, that is 3 bends which are shown in the body, which is known as Tribhang, and the sculpture composition was far more complex than earlier periods. And different kind of narrations are there. For example, the dream of Queen Maya Devi is depicted here. And besides this, some independent Buddha images are also found at Amravati, Nagarjun Konda, and also at Guntapalle, which is a rock-cut cave near Eluru in Andhra Pradesh. Then in Karnataka, Sannati is the largest stupa that has so far been excavated. And along with the images of Buddha, some other Buddhist images of Bodhisattvas like Avalokiteshwar, Padmapani, Vajrapani, Amitabh and Maitreya Buddha, they also were being sculpted, which again was a very unique feature of Amravati art. So now, having discussed the 3 art forms, that is Gandhara, Mathura and Amravati, we can do a quick kind of a comparative survey of these 3. So we find that while Gandhara can be associated with the Hellenistic art form, that is Greco-Roman elements along with traditional elements, Mathura can be considered as more indigenous in the beginning, but later on it also was to some extent influenced by Gandhara, while Amravati was completely indigenous. Then next, if we talk about the kind of material that was being used, so we see that most of the images that were being made in Amravati, they were works on marbles. Then another interesting difference was that while Gandhara Buddha was muscular and there was rich carving and great symbolism, Mathura Buddha, we see that it was lesser symbolism that one can see in these images, and it was not much refined as compared to Gandhara. And in Mathura Buddha, hair were not always curly, whereas in Gandhara Buddha, usually they were shown as curly. Also, Mathura images were made of red sandstone. While if we talk about Amravati, as I just mentioned, that most of the images were works on marble, and here Buddha was mostly represented by symbols. And here beauty was lesser as compared to Gandhara and Mathura. So these were some of the important features that were also kind of differentiating principles of these art forms. Now, having discussed these different schools of art, let us now move on to the next phase of Indian art, which we can describe as the Gupta period. So if we talk about Gupta art, we see that tolerance led to flowering of art under Gupta dynasty. Distinctive Gupta styles were used in making different kind of Buddhist figures, which were elongated, idealized, and the faces had distinct meditative gazes. Also, most of these images showed some kind of a harmony that was developing in the art form. And Gupta art was largely characterized by a turning inward, that is, an ability to communicate a higher spiritual state. And it is not only sculpture that one can consider when one is talking about art. So now we will also be talking about paintings, and the most famous paintings were from Ajanta caves. The influence of Gupta era buildings on later Indian temple architecture also will be discussed, as this influence continued right up to the medieval period. So if we talk about Gupta period around 500 CE, then great cave temples of Ajanta and Ellora were carved. Scenes from the life of Buddha became popular, and statues of Buddha were carved from 2nd to 6th century and were almost 30 in number. Dedicated to Buddhism, and the carvings in them portray the life of Buddha along with other carvings like that of animals. Ajanta, Ellora and the Bagh cave paintings indicate a Buddhist philosophy which gained immense popularity during the time of Gupta Empire. However, out of so many cave paintings which were created during this period, each is different from another, though all of them maintain the same level of elegance, the same level of opulence and also exceptional beauty, but somehow they are not similar. And the Gupta dynasty can be considered as the torch bearers as far as the history of temple architecture is concerned. So when we are talking about Gupta art, it is not only painting but also architecture, and specifically temple architecture, that has to be discussed. It was the first time that the Guptas made use of permanent materials like bricks and stones instead of making use of usual fragile materials like wood or bamboo for temple construction. So having discussed all these features, now we shall be bringing this lecture to a halt, so that in the next lecture I would be taking up this theme of Gupta art in greater detail with some more interesting visuals. Thank you.